Let's face it, the most successful cultures and societies since the dawn of human history did one of two things. They either became a warrior nation or they devoted vast resources to their warrior class. It's no coincidence that most cultures well practiced in warfare became economically prosperous and more united. Regardless of how you feel about war, for the majority of history, and until the day humanity takes its last breath, when scarcity strikes or when outside forces encroach on the well-being of a society, very few things can rival the effectiveness of brotherly comradeship and disciplined force. This idea can be dated all the way back almost 2.5 millennia ago, when Plato felt that the only thing that should separate the intellectual rulers of a nation and its mere hedonistic producers was its disciplined, brotherly, and educated warrior class. The Spartans, for example, were notorious for being a warrior nation, but many people don't know that they were fantastically well-groomed, lovers of poetry and dancing, and more than anything, they were most caring for their fellow comrades beside them. In fact, in times of war, if a Spartan returned home with a lost sword, the penalty was a fine, whereas the penalty for a lost shield was death. The reason for this was because they believed shield protected the comrades beside them during battle formations. These virtues of brotherhood and gentle lethality are in almost every warrior archetype. The Navy SEALs and their leave no brothers behind mindset, the Vikings and their impeccable hygiene and tender treatment to their fellow female Vikings, the English and French knights and what it meant to be a quote-unquote gentleman knight, the Japanese samurai and their love for beauty and simplicity. Essentially, when it comes to martial living, regardless of culture, there must be an appreciation for brotherhood and disciplined serenity. And in my opinion, very few warrior nations and cultures have appreciated these two things more than the Japanese samurai. One of the most famous swordsmen that I'm sure you've briefly obsessed about, Miyamoto Musashi, illustrated this philosophy with several memorable quotes like, "Do nothing that is of no use," and "The ultimate aim of martial arts is not having to use them." Musashi and the Japanese samurai were so obsessed with the beauty of minimal necessary force that it didn't just shape how they wielded their sword, but how they dealt with close combat when divorced from it. Where other martial arts focused primarily on being the sole agent of lethal impact, think uppercuts and wheel kicks, the Japanese and perhaps the ancient Greeks were one of the first major societies to use earth as the agent of impact. This controlled Eastern form of self-defense brings us to what the Japanese called for the first time in 1532 the gentle art, or what they called Jiujitsu. Chances are, if you really are nearly 4 minutes into this video, you either used to be bitten by the Jiu-Jitsu bug or are currently a Jiu-Jitsu-holic. And if you've ever fallen into either camp, you're definitely not alone. The truth is, we're all craving a sense of that warrior spirit in today's modern comfort, a comfort that provides technological advancements and abundance, yet at the same time, social isolation and infinite temptations. More and more, people are joining Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and it's because of the two reasons I've already mentioned: the love and discipline of mastery, and the love of comradeship. Let's start with mastery. In an incredibly influential paper titled Sex Differences in Friendship Expectation, research was conducted on more than 8,000 participants to determine their number one preferred quality in a friendship. Out of 4 preferences for friendship, loyalty, intimacy, mutual activities, and status, men ranked lowest compared to women in all preferences except one: status. Essentially, out of the 4 expectations for an ideal friend, men only care if their friends have status. And before you let your mind run wild or feel like I'm saying this is a bad thing, let me be the first to say that a friendship based on status is a tremendously invigorating, powerful, and beautiful thing. Now, whether your friendship induces feelings of inadequacy or envy is an entirely different subject that requires self-awareness and maybe even better friends. But at its core, what this preference is really getting at is the fact that men love having friends equally as much as mastery itself. And in my personal experience, there has been no greater forum for this value than in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, where people higher in rank are seen as hierarchically more mature and competent. To prove this, try this experiment if you attend a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu studio. Notice the body language of the higher belts. Also notice who receives the most attention or even the most reverence. Chances are, the highest belt in your studio receives the greatest amount of respect and interactions with people. This last part, namely the interaction aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is hands down the most intoxicating part in all of BJJ. The main reason guys keep joining Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu isn't just for the self-defense aspect. Anyone can take a martial arts YouTube channel seriously and defend themselves reasonably well given enough time and reps. But in the end, the most unique element in Jiu-Jitsu is that it's literally and figuratively connection-oriented. When you're physically connected to another guy, not only do you learn the tactics of attack and defense, but when your groin is literally rubbing on another man's groin, there's always an undertone of trust, respect, and confrontational intimacy. And this intimacy is necessary for survival. In 2013, a researcher by the name of Robert Dunbar discovered that men who see an intimate friend at a minimum twice a week are healthier and recover from illness more quickly than those who see friends once a week or not at all. In my previous video, I talked about how having more friends makes you more formidable, especially if your friends are based in self-mastery and martial prowess. Us men are joining Jiu-Jitsu in large numbers because of a virtuous feedback loop hardly any of us can see, but nearly all of us can feel. We are joining Jiu-Jitsu because mastery in the studio gives us more status, which gets us more friends, and more friends with more status makes us learn more and become more masterful in Jiu-Jitsu. It's a feedback loop that if you stick to it, will make you fall in love with not just the discipline of self-defense, but with the process of excellence and brotherhood itself. When I asked a buddy of mine, Stephan, an instructor out of Memento Combat Sports from Louisville, Tennessee, to describe his long-traveled road in Jiu-Jitsu, this is what he had to say. My Jiu-Jitsu journey has provided me with a completely different outlook on life and friendships than I had before I started. It was in my early days of working a regular 9-to-5 that I had the desire to begin martial arts, with the intentions to be physically fit and to learn how to defend myself. I heard Joe Rogan say on a podcast that Jiu-Jitsu is the best martial art for self-defense, so I figured I'd give that a shot. Now I look back at 6 years of hard work and realize that Jiu-Jitsu is much more than learning self-defense and staying in shape. It's a way of life. The community as a whole is filled with highly intelligent savages that push you to better in the sport, but also in life. I'm forced to be accountable because if I don't, my teammates will improve and I won't be able to compete. I have to sleep 8 hours, I have to eat right, and I have to lift weights if I want to be a good teammate and push them as they push me. I've chosen a way of life that puts me in a room of peers that pressures me into better life choices. I feel obligated to show up and contribute to that room of guys every day because of the way they push me to improve. Beyond the obvious physical improvements and accountability aspects of Jiu-Jitsu, the sport creates an extremely strong bond between teammates which is forged in shared misery. Demetrius Xygalatas, in his book Ritual, How Seemingly Senseless Acts Make Life Worth Living, writes, "The strong bonds forged in the face of shared suffering may be an evolutionary adaptation that helped early human communities pull together and overcome adversity when faced with existential threats such as war, predators, or natural disasters. This is why some of the most extraordinary examples of human cooperation are to be found in the midst of such existential threats." While Jiu-Jitsu isn't life and death as Xygalatas is describing, it very much forms a strong connection among practitioners through blood, sweat, injury, and cauliflower ears that are shared in training. Thank you for watching.